If you listen closely, you can feel it already. That quiet pressure inside your chest. The sense that something in your life is off. Even if everything looks fine from the outside. Not broken, not failing, just misaligned. Most people mistake this feeling for weakness. Carl Jung knew better. He believed this discomfort is not a flaw. It is a signal, a message from the deeper self, saying you have drifted from who you were meant to become. And the tragedy is this. Most people never listen. They silence the signal. They normalize the numbness. They call it adulthood, responsibility, reality. But Jung warned us, the longer you ignore the call of your true self, the louder it returns, through anxiety, exhaustion, emptiness, and a life that feels strangely unlived. This is not a motivational idea. This is psychology at its deepest level, because becoming your true self is not about self-improvement. It is about self-recovery. From the moment you were born, you entered a world that needed you to adapt. You learned quickly what earned approval and what caused rejection, what made you lovable, what made you safe, what needed to be hidden. Slowly, subtly, you began to shape yourself around expectations that were not your own. Jung called this construction the persona, the mask, not a lie, but not the truth either. The persona is who you become to survive the world. The student, the achiever, the caretaker, the strong one, the agreeable one, the one who never needs too much. At first, the persona protects you, but over time, it begins to replace you. And this is where people lose themselves, without realizing it. Because the persona does not ask what feels true. It asks what works. It rewards performance, not authenticity. So you succeed, you adapt, you function, and yet, something inside you feels untouched, unlived. Jung observed that many of his patients were not suffering because something was wrong with them, but because something essential within them had never been allowed to exist. They were living correct lives, but not true ones. And here is the uncomfortable truth. You cannot become your true self by adding more roles, more goals, more validation. You become your true self by removing what never belonged to you. This is why the journey inward often begins with confusion, because when the persona cracks, you don't immediately find clarity. You find silence, disorientation, a strange sense of not knowing who you are anymore. And this is where most people panic. They rush to rebuild the mask, to label themselves again, to attach to an identity, any identity that restores certainty. But Jung said this moment is sacred because before the true self can emerge, the false self must dissolve. This dissolution feels like loss. You may feel less motivated, less driven by things that once mattered. Old ambitions feel hollow. Old relationships feel misaligned. Old versions of you stop fitting. And the mind interprets this as failure. But psychologically, this is initiation. The psyche withdrawing energy from what no longer reflects the self. Jung called this process individuation. Not becoming special, not becoming superior, becoming whole. Individuation begins the moment you stop asking, how do I become acceptable? And start asking, what am I betraying in myself? Because every time you silence an inner truth to maintain an outer image, you fragment the self. And fragments do not disappear. They go underground. This is where the shadow forms. Everything you were discouraged from being, everything that felt unsafe to express, everything that threatened belonging, anger, sensitivity, need, desire, creativity, power, tenderness. The shadow is not evil. It is abandoned life. And what you abandon in yourself will eventually control you. From behind the scenes, Jung noticed this pattern everywhere. People who feared confrontation, but resented everyone. People who appeared kind, but felt chronically depleted. People who chased success, yet felt deeply fraudulent. Not because they were hypocrites, but because they were divided. Their conscious identity was not aligned with their unconscious truth. And the psyche always seeks balance. So it compensates through symptoms, through emotional reactions that feel disproportionate, through attraction to people who carry the traits we disowned in ourselves. This is why you can't positive think your way into becoming your true self. The unconscious does not respond to slogans. It responds to honesty. Becoming your true self requires something rare: the courage to disappoint the version of you that was built for survival, to tolerate being misunderstood while you shed identities that once kept you safe. Jung believed that most neurosis comes from a life lived against one's own nature, not dramatic trauma, not catastrophe, just quiet, persistent self-betrayal, day after day, choice after choice, until the psyche says, no more. And when it does, it doesn't ask politely. It withdraws energy, creates friction, disrupts comfort, not to punish you, but to redirect you. This is why people often awaken psychologically in moments of breakdown, burnout, heartbreak, loss of meaning, existential fatigue, moments where the old self can no longer hold. And this is the paradox Jung understood. The true self does not arrive when life is stable. It arrives when life becomes honest, when the masks stop working, when the distractions lose their power, when the soul demands alignment. Becoming your true self is not about finding a new identity. It is about remembering what you were before you learned who you were supposed to be. And this remembering does not happen in a straight line. It happens in layers. You begin to notice what drains you, what feels forced, what feels performative, what feels heavy without reason. You start listening differently to your body, to your resistance, to your quiet impulses that don't make logical sense, but feel deeply right. Jung trusted these signals. He believed the psyche carries an inner blueprint, a pattern unique to each individual, not a destiny imposed from outside, but an unfolding potential from within. When you live in alignment with this pattern, life feels demanding, but meaningful. When you live against it, life feels busy, but empty. This is the difference between existing and becoming. And here is the truth few people tell you. You will not be rewarded immediately for becoming your true self. You may lose approval, outgrow relationships, question paths that once defined you. But what you gain is something deeper: integrity, an internal coherence, where your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to speak the same language. Jung believed that when this alignment begins, the psyche releases enormous energy. Creativity returns, vitality returns, presence returns, not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes yours. This is only the beginning, because beneath the persona and beyond the shadow lie deeper structures of the psyche that guide this transformation: ancient patterns, inner forces, archetypes that shape how the true self emerges. And once you begin to recognize them, you stop fighting yourself and start cooperating with the deeper intelligence within you. We're moving there next, slowly, precisely, without rushing, because becoming your true self is not something you achieve. It is something you allow. Once the persona begins to loosen, something unfamiliar happens. You stop feeling certain about who you are, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet one. The old motivations no longer pull you forward, but the new ones haven't revealed themselves yet. This in-between state is where most people turn back, because the ego craves certainty more than truth. Jung understood this deeply. He observed that the ego, the part of you that organizes identity, will cling to familiar suffering rather than face unfamiliar freedom. Why? Because certainty feels like control, even when it is killing you slowly. This is why becoming your true self feels destabilizing at first. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the story that once explained you. And the psyche does not dissolve stories gently. It dismantles them through tension. You may feel restless without knowing why, irritated by routines that once comforted you, emotionally reactive to people who mirror parts of you you've never owned. This is not regression. This is contact. Contact with the unconscious. Jung believed the unconscious is not chaos. It is intelligence without language. It communicates through mood, through symbols, through attraction and aversion. And when the conscious identity weakens, the unconscious steps forward. This is when the shadow begins to demand attention, not as an idea, as an experience. You might notice anger rising, where you once stayed silent, needs surfacing, where you once endured, desires appearing that don't fit your self-image. The shadow does not ask permission. It emerges when repression can no longer hold. And here is the mistake most people make. They judge the shadow instead of listening to it. They call themselves toxic, selfish, weak, unspiritual. But Jung insisted that the shadow is morally neutral. It contains both darkness and gold. Yes, there are destructive impulses there. Rage, envy, resentment. But beneath them are violated boundaries, suppressed power, unlived courage. When anger appears, it is often guarding dignity. When envy appears, it is often pointing toward desire. When bitterness appears, it is often protecting grief. If you silence the shadow, you silence the message. And when the message is silenced, it does not disappear. It acts out through sabotage, through projection, through patterns you swear you want to escape, but keep repeating. This is why Jung said, what you do not make conscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Becoming your true self requires a different relationship with discomfort, not avoidance, not indulgence, curiosity, the kind that asks, what part of me is trying to live? This curiosity is the beginning of integration. Integration does not mean acting on every impulse. It means acknowledging every truth, because wholeness does not come from being good. It comes from being real. Jung noticed that people who identified too strongly with goodness often became unconsciously cruel. They denied their own aggression and projected it onto others. They called people selfish, toxic, narcissistic, while remaining unaware of their own buried power. True selfhood is not passive. It has edges. It says no. It disrupts. It changes dynamics. This is why becoming your true self often costs you approval, because the persona was built to preserve harmony. The self is built to preserve truth, and truth rearranges relationships. You may notice that certain people become uncomfortable around you, not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are no longer playing the role they depended on, the compliant one, the strong one, the listener, the fixer. When you step out of these roles, others feel exposed, and they may resist. This resistance can trigger guilt. Jung warned about this. He said guilt often arises, not because we have harmed someone, but because we have stopped sacrificing ourselves. The psyche knows the difference between selfishness and selfhood. Selfishness takes without regard. Selfhood refuses to disappear. This distinction is critical because many people remain fragmented, not because they lack insight, but because they fear the relational consequences of becoming whole. But here is what Jung discovered over decades. Relationships built on the false self cannot survive the true one, and relationships that survive the true self are the only ones that nourish the soul. This is why individuation feels lonely at times, not because you are becoming isolated, but because you are becoming specific. You are no longer everything to everyone. You are something to someone, and something to yourself. As the shadow integrates, another layer of the psyche begins to reveal itself. The inner figures. Jung observed that within every psyche live archetypal energies that shape how we relate to life. The inner authority, the inner child, the inner lover, the inner warrior. When these forces are unconscious, they dominate behavior. When they are conscious, they become resources. For example, a suppressed inner authority creates passivity and resentment. A wounded inner child creates dependency and fear of abandonment. An exiled inner lover creates emotional numbness or obsession. These are not pathologies. They are unintegrated energies. And the work of becoming your true self is not to destroy these inner figures, but to give them a voice. Jung believed that when these inner energies are denied expression. They turn inward and sabotage the psyche. But when they are honored consciously, they organize the personality. This is why people who have done deep inner work carry a certain presence, not arrogance, not intensity, a grounded wholeness. They are not split against themselves. They know their darkness and do not fear it. They know their tenderness and do not hide it. They do not need to prove who they are because they are no longer arguing with themselves inside. This internal peace does not come from control. It comes from relationship, a relationship with the unconscious. Jung used dreams as one of the primary gateways into this dialogue because dreams speak in symbol, not logic. They reveal what the waking mind avoids. When you begin to take your inner world seriously, your dreams change. They become more vivid, more instructive, more personal, not predictions, reflections. And if you listen, they guide. The psyche wants wholeness, more than comfort, more than success, more than social approval. This is why people who achieve everything without becoming themselves still feel empty. They have built impressive lives around a missing center. Becoming your true self means relocating the center of gravity from the persona to the self, from outer validation to inner alignment, from performing to inhabiting. And once this shift begins, life stops feeling like something you must constantly manage. It becomes something you participate in, not passively, consciously, with agency, with humility, with depth. And something else begins to happen. Synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, people, opportunities, ideas. Not because the universe is rewarding you, but because when the psyche is aligned, perception sharpens. You notice what was always there. This is what Jung meant when he said the world becomes symbolic. To the individuated person, life begins to speak back, not in answers, but in resonance. This is not mystical thinking. It is psychological attunement. The psyche no longer wastes energy on inner conflict. That energy becomes available for creativity, love, and direction. This is why becoming your true self feels like coming home to a place you have never been. Familiar, unfamiliar, deeply right. And still, this is not the end, because beyond the personal unconscious lies something even older, a collective layer that shapes your fears, your longings, and the myths you unconsciously live by. To understand that layer is to understand why your struggle feels larger than you, why it feels ancient, why becoming yourself feels like fulfilling something that existed long before you were born. And once you see that, your life stops feeling random. It starts feeling purposeful in a way that cannot be explained, only lived. At a certain point on this path, you begin to notice something unsettling. Your life starts resisting you, not violently, subtly. Plans stall. Motivation fades. Old rewards stop working. This is not failure. This is the psyche withdrawing its energy from what no longer belongs to you. Jung called this process the loss of libido from false structures. Libido, in Jungian terms, is not just sexual energy. It is life force, psychic vitality, meaning, and meaning cannot be forced to flow where it no longer fits. So when you feel drained, uninspired, or strangely numb, ask yourself, what am I still investing in that no longer reflects who I am becoming? Because the psyche is economical. It does not waste energy forever. When the ego refuses to evolve, the unconscious intervenes, sometimes gently, sometimes ruthlessly. Careers collapse, relationships end, identities fracture, not as punishment, as correction. Jung saw midlife crises, depressions, and existential breakdowns, not as disorders, but as calls to individuation. The psyche saying, you have gone as far as this version of you can go. This is why becoming your true self often feels like things are falling apart. But they are not. They are falling into place, just not according to the old map. At this stage, one of the most dangerous temptations appears. The temptation to retreat into the persona again, to numb yourself, to distract, to become busy. to call this phase just a rough patch instead of a threshold. But Jung warned, what is avoided in consciousness returns as destiny. If you refuse to listen now, the psyche will speak louder later, through illness, through obsession, through repeating pain. This is why true selfhood requires courage of a rare kind, not the courage to act, the courage to stay with confusion, with not knowing, with the death of old ambitions. Most people never develop this capacity. They rush to replace meaning, instead of letting it be reborn. But meaning, like identity, is not manufactured. It emerges, and emergence requires space. This is where solitude becomes essential, not isolation. Solitude, the space where you are not reacting to others' expectations, the space where your inner voice is no longer drowned out. Jung spent years in near isolation. During his own confrontation with the unconscious, he called it my descent into the depths. He painted, he wrote, he dialogued with inner figures, not because he was escaping life, but because he was rebuilding his relationship to it. He understood something most never do. Before you can live your life, you must meet it, and meeting it requires silence. In this silence, another layer of the psyche reveals itself. The archetypes. These are not ideas you choose. They are patterns that choose you. The hero, the exile, the martyr, the caretaker, the rebel. You are not just an individual. You are a living myth. And if you don't know which myth you are living, you will act it out unconsciously, again and again, until awareness interrupts the pattern. For example, if you unconsciously live the martyr archetype, you will sacrifice yourself and resent others for it. If you live the hero archetype unconsciously, you will seek endless battles and never rest. If you live the exile archetype unconsciously, you will feel like you never belong, even when welcomed. These are not flaws. They are unconscious identifications. Becoming your true self means becoming conscious of the myth that has been guiding you, and then choosing how you relate to it, not rejecting it, not worshiping it, integrating it. Jung said individuation does not free you from archetypes. It frees you from being possessed by them. This is why awareness changes everything. Once you see the pattern, it loosens its grip, and in that loosening, choice appears. Choice is the birthright of the individuated psyche. Before that, you react, you repeat, you justify. After that, you respond, you decide, you author. This is also where responsibility enters. Not the heavy kind, the existential kind. You stop blaming your parents, your past, your circumstances, not because they didn't matter, but because staying there keeps you divided. Jung never denied trauma, but he believed healing begins when suffering is given meaning, not explanation. Meaning. Meaning transforms pain into initiation. It turns wounds into thresholds. This is why some people grow deeper through suffering, and others grow bitter. The difference is not the pain. It is the relationship to it. The true self does not emerge by avoiding suffering. It emerges by metabolizing it, by allowing pain to reorganize the psyche instead of hardening it. At this stage, you may feel older than your age, not tired, ancient, as if you were carrying something larger than personal history. This is because individuation connects you to the collective human story. You begin to recognize that your struggles are not unique. They are variations of timeless themes: loss, identity, belonging, purpose. And this recognition does something profound. It humbles the ego. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is life asking of me?" This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now, you are in dialogue with existence, not fighting it. And something else begins to soften. The fear of being misunderstood. When you know who you are becoming, misunderstanding no longer feels like annihilation. It feels like friction, temporary, survivable. You no longer need everyone to see you clearly. You need yourself to see you clearly. This is where confidence actually comes from. Not bravado, not certainty, self-recognition, the quiet knowing I am aligned with my path, even if others don't understand it yet. This alignment produces a strange paradox. You care less about approval, and paradoxically, you become more impactful because people respond to coherence. They feel it. They may not know why, but they trust it. This is why truly individuated people often become leaders without trying to be. Their presence organizes the space, not through dominance, through integration. They are not split. They are not performing. They are inhabiting themselves fully. This is rare, and rarity has gravity. But this is not the final layer yet, because even alignment can become another identity, another subtle persona. There is still something deeper that must be surrendered, the illusion of control, because becoming your true self does not mean you control life. It means you cooperate with it, and that cooperation requires trust, trust in a process that cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, cannot be bypassed. This is where faith enters Jung's psychology, not religious faith, psychological faith, faith that the psyche knows how to heal itself when listened to, faith that the path unfolds, step by step, not all at once, faith that confusion is not the enemy, but the threshold. And once this trust settles in, something remarkable happens. You stop asking when you will arrive. You realize you are already walking, and walking is the becoming. There comes a moment when seeking ends, not because you've found all the answers, but because you've stopped running from the questions. This is where becoming your true self stops being a concept and becomes a way of standing in the world. You no longer wake up asking, "Who should I be today?" You wake up asking, "How honestly can I live today?" This shift is subtle, but it rewires everything. You stop over-explaining, stop over-proving, stop over-performing, not out of arrogance, out of alignment. Jung said the individuated person does not seek validation from the crowd because they are already in dialogue with something deeper, their own center. This is where inner authority is born, not dominance, not control. Authority, the quiet gravity of someone who knows where they stand. You begin to notice that certain things fall away naturally. Old ambitions lose their charge. Certain relationships dissolve without drama. Some goals no longer excite you, not because you've failed, but because you've outgrown the motivation behind them. The ego wants achievement. The true self wants expression. Achievement asks, "What will this give me?" Expression asks, "What wants to move through me?" This is why people who align with their true self often look calmer, even while doing more. They are no longer fighting themselves. Energy stops leaking. Attention sharpens. Life simplifies, not because it becomes easy, but because it becomes coherent. And coherence is powerful. You begin to trust your instincts without constantly second-guessing them. You say no without needing a justification. You say yes without betraying yourself afterward. You feel less reactive, not because nothing affects you, but because you are no longer fragmented. There is a center now, a place you return to. Jung called this the self, not the ego, not the persona, the organizing principle of the psyche. When your life is oriented around this center, decisions feel different. You don't rush them. You don't dramatize them. You listen, and listening becomes your greatest skill. You listen to your body, to your fatigue, to your excitement. You listen to what drains you and what restores you. You listen to patterns instead of isolated events. And slowly, your life begins to rearrange itself around what is essential. This is where fear changes form. It doesn't disappear, but it stops being paralyzing. Fear becomes information, a signal that something meaningful is at stake. You no longer ask, "How do I get rid of fear?" You ask, "What is fear pointing me toward?" This is maturity, not cynicism, not detachment, depth. You stop chasing intensity and start valuing truth. You stop seeking certainty and start cultivating clarity. And clarity does not come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing what matters. This is also where compassion deepens, not the performative kind, the grounded kind. Because once you've faced your own shadow, you stop being shocked by others. You see projections. You see wounds. You see fear acting out. You no longer need to fix everyone, or save them, or fight them. You meet people where they are, without abandoning where you are. This is real empathy, boundaried, honest, stable. Jung believed that the individuated person does not withdraw from the world. They re-enter it, from a different place, not to belong, but to contribute, not to impress, but to express. Your work changes. Your relationships change. Even your silence changes. Because silence is no longer avoidance. It is presence. You are no longer trying to be understood by everyone. You are focused on being true. And truth has a strange effect. It attracts the right people and repels the wrong ones. Without effort, this is not loneliness. It is filtration. And yes, this path costs you things. Illusions, certain identities, old attachments. But what it gives you cannot be taken away. An internal home, a sense of authorship over your life, a quiet confidence that does not depend on applause. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were told to be, not who you learned to survive as, not who gained approval, who you are when no one is watching." This is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily return. Some days you will forget. Some days you will regress. That's not failure. That's being human. Individuation is not perfection. It is honesty over time. So here is the real question. Not, do you understand this? But, will you live it? Will you notice where you are still performing, where you are still avoiding, where you are still living a life that no longer fits your inner truth? And will you have the courage to make small, aligned changes? Not dramatic ones, but honest ones. Because becoming your true self does not happen in one moment. It happens in choices. What you tolerate, what you nourish, what you walk away from, and what you finally allow yourself to become. If this spoke to something deep in you, don't let it pass through unchanged. Stay with this work. Subscribe to this channel so you continue walking this path with clarity instead of confusion, not for motivation, but for depth, not for answers, but for integration. And most importantly, leave a comment below with one sentence. This is the part of myself I am ready to stop abandoning, because naming it is the first act of becoming. You were never meant to live as a fragment. And now, you know the way back.